Hi there, welcome back. Thanks for joining me again today. It's another week, another digital session, and today we are diving into Q3 episode 7 titled Teaching Disciples Part 1, where we will expose the stories in Mark chapters 8 through 9. You ready? Let's do this. So, who exactly is a disciple? Better still, what truly makes you a disciple? Is it possible to be in church every Sabbath, actively participating in activities of worship, yet still not qualify as a disciple? Let's make it more real. Have I been a disciple thus far? If not, what can I do differently? The plan is hopefully we can learn one or two things in our study today to address these questions. Let's go. Let's start from the very beginning. Jesus' earthly ministry was always going to lead to the cross. And we know from the 70-week prophecy of Daniel chapter 9 that from the inauguration of his earthly ministry during his baptism at Jordan up till the cross will be 3.5 years. Now that's pretty short. Being very intentional, part of his game plan was to partner with humans. And that's where the disciples coming, who will eventually carry on the torch of his ministry even after his ascension. So it was really critical that they understood who he really is and his game plan, considering all that will be thrown at them post ascension. So in the first half of his ministry, the disciples had the privilege of a front row view, witnessing for themselves the wisdom of his teachings, the supernatural manifestations that accompanied him, and even the confessions of demons regarding his divinity. Jesus was in all this giving them an opportunity to form an opinion of him without coercion. There is something special about a personal conviction not coerced, but coming from a place of self-realization that stays immovable even in the face of storms. They needed to get here before Jesus shared with them his next game plan, being his journey to the cross. Another indication that spiritual insight is a continuum as we devote more time in growing. Let's explore together some of these miracles. Now, my approach to Bible study usually is twofold. One, what are the facts of the matter? And two, what's in it for me? How does this apply to me? It doesn't make any sense spending so much time on something that neither benefits you or you adding value to. So in our study today, we will explore the facts of the matter, then figure out how exactly they apply to us today. And in some cases, we might explore beyond the boundaries of the lesson. And I hope that's okay with you. All right, let's go. Okay then, story number 1. In Mark chapter 8 from verse 22 to 40, Jesus had just arrived Bethesda, and they brought him a blind man to heal. Now before this, he had encountered different cases, and especially the blind man, and he healed each one, but with different protocols. For instance, for blind Bartimaeus in Mark 10:46 to 52, it was, "Go, your faith has made you well." He spoke, and it was done. No drama. For the two blind men in Matthew 20, verse 29 to 34, Jesus simply touched their eyes, and immediately they regained their sight. Now, for the man who was born blind in John chapter 9, it was a bit dramatic. He spat on the ground, made clay of the spittle. He applied the clay to his eyes and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." Now he seems to be simulating his creation protocol of man from the dust. But anyway, it worked, and the man was healed. Now, in the case of this man brought to him at Bethesda, he gets a bit more dramatic. This time, after taking him away from his village, he spits on the blind man's eyes, touched him for the first time, but it seemed his sight was still blurry. And then he touches the man a second time, and this time he was fully restored. Okay, so we got the facts of the matter. Now let's get to the application part, shall we? But first, a little digression. Let's try to insert ourselves into the scene. Imagine the scenario was playing out in your local church. Your pastor or elder, known to be used by God, visits your local church to minister. And in course of the service, he calls out the sick and begins to use some unprecedented protocols to minister to them in an attempt to heal them. What will be your default reaction or disposition? My guess is I lost you when I said unprecedented protocols. If the protocol is not what we are used to, we are more inclined to dismiss it and in some cases arrogate it to the adversary. And that's exactly what they did. The truth is, while God will not contradict himself, he is not confined to just one way of doing things, our way. It is he who defines the reference, not us. So when next you do not fully understand, do not be in a hurry to shut it down, like the Pharisees did. Instead, wait in the place of prayer till God brings clarity. Now, back to the text. Why did Jesus need to touch him twice before his healing was complete? What do you think? Well, we can only speculate, but there are two possible interpretations. One, now recall that Jesus spat into his eyes. So, chances are his sight was still blurred because of the spittle in his eyes. So in his second touch, he simply cleaned out the moisture in his eyes and his vision got better. Another possible interpretation is that, as was the case most of the time, Jesus used such encounters as teaching opportunities for his disciples. In this case, he was teaching them about how spiritual insight sometimes takes time to unfold, as we will see in the next two chapters where Jesus tries to teach his disciples about his coming death, but they have trouble grasping it, even though he tells them over and over and over again in plain language, as we'll see in Mark 8:31 and 9 verse 31-32. Story number 2, as we find in Mark chapter 8, 27-33. After this, the next conversation we see Jesus having is with his disciples about his identity. Who do people say I am? Actually, scratch that. Who do you say I am? Now, what Jesus was really asking here was, based on the accumulation of all the facts you have gathered and the experience that we have shared or witnessed together, do you know me? This is not just a question for the disciples then. How do you respond today? You've been gathering data for the past 1, 5, and for some of us more than 10 years of being in a relationship with Jesus. Question is, have we remained within the confines of just knowing about him and playing church? Or have we come to know him? As always, don't tell me. You know what to do. Moving on. After Peter's acknowledgement of who Jesus really is, Jesus begins to explain in very clear terms his journey to the cross and all the rigors involved. He says, I'll suffer many things. I'll be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes. I'll be killed, but I will resurrect after 3 days, as we find in Mark 8, verse 31. The text even says, he revealed the matter plainly. This was not a drill, and definitely not a parable. This is it. So why do you think his disciples still did not understand? I mean, what's there not to understand? He was very plain. I know what you are thinking. But before we go there, let's slow down and put things in context. Let's walk in Peter's shoes just a little bit. I was busy minding my own business. I just got married. We were happy. I had a job. And then my brother Andrew, who happened to be John the Baptist's disciple at the time, witnesses your baptism with the spectacular display of the Godhead, acknowledging you as a member of the Godhead. Quite an impressive resume, I'll admit. Still, I was minding my business at work when you came to my office and called me to follow you, giving up everything else. I did. I gave up everything and have followed you everywhere ever since. And now you are talking about dying? Really? Does that sound like you? Was this really a case of understanding or denial? The real question here is, how do we respond when the agenda of God seems to disconform with our agenda? Do we A, rebel outrightly, B, interpret it away even if our counter interpretations do not make sense, or C, submit? The disciples seem to fall into the B category. Verse 32 says, Peter took Jesus aside and rebuked him. Now, we don't know details of what he said, but whatever it was, it didn't seem as though it was in support of Jesus' agenda. The next series of events are both profound and enlightening. In verse 33, Jesus responds with, Get thee behind me, Satan. Wait, what? Satan? Really? How did we get here? Why refer to Peter, your guy, as Satan? Was he possessed? Or was Peter a double agent who just got busted? Was Peter sincere in his reasoning? Did he mean well? Or was he just faking it? What exactly is happening here? The next phrase in the same text provides context to unravel answers to these questions and more. It reads, For you are not setting your mind on God's interest, but man's. Some texts put it this way, you are not mindful of the things of God. There is a lot to unpack here, so let's do that. This is yet another principle in the protocols of God. Jesus seems to be saying here, when you are not mindful of the things of God and His program, you are by default advocating the agenda of Satan. Remember that. Whatever Peter's counsels were, regardless of his sincerity, they were not in harmony with God's purpose of grace toward a lost world, nor with the lesson of self-sacrifice that Jesus had come to teach through his life. Jesus uses the next 4 verses from 34 to 38 to reiterate this principle of self-sacrifice to advance the cause of God as a core principle and prerequisite in discipleship. So question is, regardless of your sincerity, through your actions and inactions, Whose agenda are you promoting? Think about it. And that brings us to story number 3, as we find in Mark chapter 9 from verse 1 to 13. Jesus takes with him Peter, James, and John up the mountain where he is transfigured and visited by Moses and Elijah, who encourage him concerning his trip to the cross. And as a cloud overshadowed them, the Father reiterates his approval with those words, "This is my beloved Son, hear him." In this narrative, the disciples did not play any active role in the scene. So the question is, why did he go with them? Though Jesus did not explain why, it seems he was trying really hard to carry them along, knowing where they were. Jesus knew they did not fully understand him, especially this phase of his ministry. So he carries them along, especially Peter, after that firm rebuke, to witness him in his glory firsthand and further strengthen his faith. While up there, they had the privilege of eavesdropping on the conversation Elijah and Moses encouraging Jesus on his journey to the cross, as we find in Luke 9 verse 30-31. They also had the Father's reaffirmation of Jesus as the Son. Not only Andrew did the first time during his baptism, but now they do. There is something about experiencing truth beyond the words that consolidates your conviction beyond reasonable doubt. They might not have fully understood everything that happened, but I want to believe that the identity of Jesus was settled in their hearts after this experience. Story number 4. So after the Transfiguration and all the side gists, they get down the mountain, and guess what? There was a huge commotion. Apparently, the same guys who in Mark 6 verse 7-12 had gone out in twos, casting out demons and healing all manner of sicknesses earlier, could not recreate their results. A concerned father had brought to them his demon-possessed son for deliverance, but these guys could not deliver the son for as long as Jesus was up the mountain. When Jesus returned, after some inquiries, he rebuked the demon and the boy was delivered. Behind closed doors, the disciples inquired, "Why couldn't we heal this one?" And Jesus says, "This one comes by fasting and praying." So we find in verse 29. A quick recap. 1. In hindsight, now we know it was God's will for the boy to be delivered. Number 2. Had Jesus not shown up, his case would have lingered. Question is why? When Jesus arrives the scene, he expressed disappointment in the inability of his disciples to heal the boy before he went ahead to heal him. The point is, the failure to heal this boy was an indictment on the spirituality of his disciples, not because it wasn't God's will or that he could not be healed. Jesus reiterates this fact during his debriefing session. This type comes only through fasting and praying, meaning it is possible but requires more than the conventional. And the prescribed recipe to acquire this kind of spiritual capacity is fasting and praying. It is not so much in the activities, but in the power of his presence that these activities enable us access. So let's bring it home. Extrapolating. Is it possible that certain anomalies that we have come to tolerate in our midst are indictments on our spirituality? Could it be possible that God truly desires to break these bonds of wickedness in our midst, to undo the heavy burdens and to let the oppressed go free? But he is looking for someone who will stand in the gap and intercede. But we have become all too disconnected spiritually to be used as avenues of God's tender mercies. As a result of that, these anomalies have been perpetuated in our midst. Think about it. If we are spiritually sensitive, we will be uncomfortable with the series of anomalies round and about us. You do not need a church board meeting or setting up a committee to pray. You can start yourself right now, right here. Contend with God until He either fixes it or gives you peace of mind. Refuse to settle. I rest my case. All right then. Hey, Chichi, do you mind running up the session for us, please?
Sure. I'll start with story number 5 and later wrap up with the summary. Story number 5 comes from Mark 9:33 to 50. We learned from the succeeding accounts one of the major reasons for their spiritual lethargy. Their minds were preoccupied with the wrong things, centered on who was the greatest. In response, Jesus uses the opportunity to both correct and teach 3 principles of His kingdom. The 3 principles of His kingdom are A. Service a path to greatness in this kingdom. B. In response to John's idea of exclusivity, Jesus counsels that those not against us are for us. God has His children outside of this fold. We must get rid of this kind of narrow and exclusive mindset and, like Jesus, manifest a far-reaching sympathy. Finally, C. Every gesture made to support those in Christian service, even in small ways, does not go unnoticed in heaven. So, in summary, to tie it all together, Jesus uses a bigger picture approach. The ultimate goal here is to make it home, as in be heaven ready. So whatever threatens this goal while we're still here should be seen as a distraction and should be avoided at all cost. He uses worst case scenarios, negatives, to emphasize how far we should be willing to go to avoid these distractions. This is not aimed at encouraging mutilations. There is also a reference to the fire of hell that should never be quenched. This is often taken out of context to mean an eternally burning hell. But taking the entire conversation into consideration, if we take it literally, we will all have mutilated hands and eyes, and some of us will be resting at the bottom of seas with a millstone around our necks. The point is, it is not meant to be taken literally. The reference to the fire of hell that shall never be quenched refers to the eternal outcome of the burning, not the burning process. It is a similar reference to the fires of Sodom and Gomorrah, and we know it's not burning till date. The point here is, those who are lost do not burn forever. Instead, they perish forever. And that's it, folks. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Chichi. I really appreciate it. Next week, we will be exploring the part 2 of the same topic, Jesus teaching His disciples. Hope you stay tuned, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining in today. It was like, share, and subscribe.
Well, you heard the man. It's just about doodling out. I'll see you next Sabbath.